Ladies, gentlemen, and exiles of all ages, with early access for Path of Exile 2 coming out in just a couple of days, one of the biggest questions to answer if you've decided you're going to play the game is, what class are you going to choose? And more information was officially released just last night, going over every single notable passive from the Ascendancy trees, so every major way in which each Ascendancy will affect your class's gameplay. Technically speaking, a large portion of the game doesn't really care about your base class choice, because the actual passive skill tree itself is the same for every class, aside from your different starting locations, and even active skills are all tied to either a specific weapon type or stat requirements, and any class can technically use any weapon type as long as you have these stat requirements to do so. So on the surface, it may seem a lot more free, but there is one extremely important part of your base class decision, which is your Ascendancy. Each base class has 2 Ascendancies available to them at early access launch, with more being planned to release throughout early access. Ascendancies are the equivalent of a subclass or specialization within Path of Exile 2. They unlock a more unique playstyle that is only available for that Ascendancy choice, and the Ascendancies that you have access to depend on your base class as well. So essentially, more than anything when picking your base class for Path of Exile 2, what you really should be caring about is knowing which Ascendancy you want to use long term, because technically you could be a deadeye ranger and then also equip a crossbow and have your crossbow skills like you were playing a mercenary as well if you really wanted to, but Ascendancies are permanent. You can only unlock one per character. It's also important, as we have the majority of the skill nodes now for each Ascendancy, to mention that currently the total will be 8 points to spend in your Ascendancy tree, and every tree has far more than 8 nodes, so even within your Ascendants, you can't have everything all at once. Choices must be made, and there will be differences between builds, even in the same Ascendancy in that sort of way. All that said, let's talk about every Ascendancy coming into Path of Exile 2 at early access launch, their general gameplay style, their concept, and some of what makes them special as far as their specific nodes. Starting off then with the warrior, the first Ascendancy is warbringer. This is essentially a totemic shaman style archetype, with the example skills and nodes that we've been shown being ancestral call, which summons spirits of your ancestors to fight alongside you whenever you use totems; jade heritage, a unique skill that essentially makes you invulnerable, turning you into jade for its active duration, letting you tank particularly nasty boss abilities without having to physically move out of them or otherwise manage your way through them. And then there's also warcaller's bellow, which makes warcry explode all nearby corpses for 25% of their own life pool as physical damage. And Great Wolf's Howl is a node as well, which lets you ignore cooldowns on your warcries as well, so you can actually fully build around this to be a good portion of your mob clearing AoE type combat if you really want to. There's also Anvil's Weight, which lets you break armor from enemies to increase your physical damage, which synergizes with imploding impacts to let you break enemy armor below 0 as well. There's Wooden Wall, which makes 20% of damage taken from totems before the player, Renly's Training, which gives 40% base block chance regardless of your shield's value, and Turtle Charm, which lowers block chance in general, but lets you block damage from any hit even while the shield is not raised. The other warrior ascension then is called the Titan, where the warbringer is more about defenses with a unique skill, summoning minions to help out and taking advantage of corpses, essentially using battlefield tactics to turn any situation to your advantage. The Titan is just your classic me warrior, me use big weapon, hit big number, thing go smash good type of Ascendancy. First there's Earthbreaker, which gives all slam skills a chance to cause an aftershock, which essentially just acts as a 20% chance to deal double damage. If you then cause every slam attack to hit big numbers to begin with, the aftershock will also then hit for a massive amount too. Crushing Impact makes all hits count as crushing blow, which lets you build up large amounts of heavy stun with attacks that otherwise would not be doing so, and it gives you access to some high damage uptime periods against bosses or even smaller enemies or elites too. And to pair with that quite well, the last Ascendancy node we know about for this one is Surprising Strength, which gives you 40% more damage against heavy stunned enemies. There's also Stone Skin, which gives you bonus armor related to the armor stat on your body armor slot, Ancestral Empowerment, which gives you bonus damage and area of effect for every other slam skill used, Colossal Capacity, which increases your inventory size, mostly just as an incentive to make you actually put the full 4 points in to reach hulking form, which gives you 50% increased effect of all small passive nodes, theoretically across the entire skill tree, which will make Titan extremely strong at stat scaling long term. The only other new node from this here is Mysterious Lineage for 15% more maximum life. Essentially, your archetypes here are more shaman, type primal, beastly, angry totem warrior for the warbringer, or just your giant stunny smacky stick style for the Titan. After that, we have the Sorceress base class, and this as a base class, the more elementally focused of the magic classes, with the Witch the other main magic class being much closer to a necromancer or warlock kind of vibe long term. Sorceress then of course has 2 ascendancy classes as well, the first being Stormweaver. This leans even further further into the elemental magic vibes to essentially make you, as the Ascendancy states, a master of the storm. This will give you bonus spell effects, it'll make your elements more potent, and reward you for interweaving them together with massive area of effect and chaining damage between enemies too. The nodes that we've been shown so far are Tempest Caller. This gives you a skill called Elemental Storm and makes it trigger on any spell-based critical hit, and these are sort of circles of elemental magic that you'll see on the screen. Strike Twice makes enemies able to be affected by 2 different shocks at the same time at the cost of shock duration, essentially resulting in higher burst potential through this. And also the Shaper of Storms deeper in the Ascendancy tree gives you shock chance from all damage and all hits, rather than just those that specify it, so you can even apply shock with fire spells. As well, from the larger info dump that happened last night, we learned about Scouring Winds, which lowers enemy resistances even further from the exposure effect, Rain Dancer, which reduces Elemental Storm's cooldown, Heavy Snows, which makes enemies able to be affected by 2 separate chills, reducing monster action speed by up to 35% maximum, which is pretty significant, honestly. Shaper of Winters makes all damage from hits contribute to chill, as opposed to the node that does this for shock that we saw before. And then there are things like Force of Will, which gives increased effect of Arcane Surge based on maximum mana, Heart of the Storm, which gives 40% of elemental damage taken regenerated as energy shield, and Constant Gale, which is what gives you Arcane Surge to begin with. The other Ascendancy class for Sorceress then is one a lot of people seem very intrigued by, which is the Chronomancer. This leans away from the elemental magic side of the base class and other ascendants, and instead goes straight into time-based magic, as the name implies, which is a really cool concept. This gives you a new skill called Time Freeze, which literally just puts a bunch of enemies nearby in stasis, a skill called Temporal Rift, which puts you backwards in time, including resetting your health and mana to their prior values at the time you go back to, so you can use this after taking a big hit to restore everything or after bursting through all of your mana. And there's also Time Snap as a new skill for this Ascendancy 2, which just lets you reset all of your other cooldowns. Outside of this, there is Now and Again, which gives a chance to not put skills on cooldown to begin with, Quicksand Hourglass, which increases cast speed for 4 out of every 12 seconds, which is a fairly unique concept of burstiness, honestly, Apex of the Moment, which just slows nearby enemies in general, Circular Heartbeat, which just heals you for 30% of all damage taken, and then the Rapid River, which makes the recoup effects happen over the course of 4 seconds. And where the Stormweaver basically lets you just have massive amounts of chaos around you and large amounts of damage over all else, the Chronomancer is a lot more about control, utility, importantly, will also definitely reward those who make the best use of their time-based abilities. So it will likely be much more complex to master than the other option, but in a way I imagine that many players will find quite satisfying. After this then we have the Ranger base class. This is of course your classic archer setup, focused on a bow and arrow as well as other types of utility to sort of control the battlefield. The first Ascendancy option for Ranger is called the Deadeye, and it leans very directly and clearly into the bow and arrow combat itself. This is all about firing a lot of arrows, powerful arrows from a distance, and using your own positioning to actually control the flow of an encounter instead of more utility options. The nodes that we've been shown so far for this one in Path of Exile 2 are Endless Munitions, which generates a bonus projectile from every single skill you have, Gathering Winds, which gives you tailwind on any skill used, increasing skill speed, evasion rating, and movement speed per stack up to 10 stacks, but then you also lose this effect whenever you get hit, encouraging careful gameplay and positioning too. On a similar note, there is also Eagle Eyes, which removes the accuracy penalty for shooting enemies that are far away from you, further pushing you to essentially just fight at maximum reasonable range, firing loads of arrows as fast as you can and kiting enemies around the screen. Outside of this, the other nodes that were revealed last night are Avidity, which gives you a 30% chance when gaining frenzy charges to instead just instantly go to maximum frenzy charges, Thrilling Chase, which has a chance to double the benefits when consuming frenzy charges too, so just an RNG power buff, then 2 contending upgrades, Point Blank, which does increased damage at close range, or Far Shot, which makes you do no damage at all within 3.5 meters, but maximum increase at 7 meters and out. Held Shots will let you apply a bonus mark, and then Wind War will give you 3% less damage taken per tailwind stack as well. The alternative Ascendancy for this base class, for the Ranger, is the Pathfinder, and where the Deadeye sort of tries to emulate that classic Legolas style of archer archetype, the Pathfinder is closer to sort of like Hawkeye. You focus heavily on poisons and flask manipulation, which is a fancy way of saying that this class has skills that turn your flasks into grenades that can apply damage or various statuses as well. So you're heavily about just debuffing your enemies, outthinking them, out-preparing them, and essentially ambushing them. As far as the nodes that we've seen shown so far, this is actually the largest amount really. We've got Bleeding and Fulminating Concoctions as separate skills, each of these giving you a different kind of grenade that apply different statuses, consuming flash charges to use. In the later release information last night, we also got to see alternate concoctions, including Shattering for cold damage, Explosive for fire damage, and Poisonous for, well, actually chaos damage, as well as more powerful poisons when afflicted through this skill. As well, in the new release, least, there was Connected Chemistry for 50% increased flask charge generation, Enduring Elixirs to help push flasks towards better offensive use, and Traveler's Wisdom for just 5 bonus free skill points for your passive tree. Not for the Ascendancy tree, but still, you can just use these anywhere. As for the other nodes, Contagious Contamination spreads poisons between enemies when you kill one that is afflicted, and Overwhelming Toxicity doubles the number of poisons that you can inflict on enemies. Usually poisons in Path of Exile 2 specifically are going to be limited to 1 at a time, but there are of course ways of increasing that through gear or such, and this makes Pathfinder uniquely good at capitalizing on this, as it can uniquely double this amount, not just additive increase, but essentially acting as a multiplier for any upgrades that you'd otherwise get, and just doubling your poison damage outright. Then the final nodes that we've seen are Running Assault, which reduces the movement speed penalty while attacking, and Relentless Pursuit, which makes you completely immune to slowing effects as well. After this then we have the Witch-based class, which is your classic necromancer style of combat and play, creating loads of minions, some lasting permanently, others temporary, and then using curses and statuses to back all that up, along with interactions with the corpses of your foes of course. The two Ascendancies lean quite different ways for this too, with the first and one of my personal favorites in the game being the Infernalist. This leans hard into the fiery doom and gloom side of the chaos as a concept, and makes you a bit more of a warlock style archetype. The Infernalist gets a minion type called an Infernal Hound, which absorbs some of the damage that would otherwise hit you first. This Ascendancy also completely changes how mana works for you, removing the base concept that pretty much everyone else uses and replacing it with Infernal Flame. This is an increasing gauge as opposed to decreasing like mana does, and you should think of it sort of like an overheat meter to match your heavy focus on fiery effects. If you overheat from using too much fire, you take an absolutely massive chunk of damage, which will pretty much kill you unless you have things to stop that. But there are also effects like Bringer of Flame, which makes all player and minion damage have ignite chance and magnitude if you're above 30% of your Infernal Flame gauge, so the gameplay loop is about staying at higher levels of Infernal Flame without ever fully capping out and nuking yourself as a result. Then we have another unique skill of this Ascendancy too, which is Demon Form, literally letting you turn into a demon, which just looks badass as hell. In this form, you have increased cast speed and damage, but gain a rapidly increasing amount of damage taken per second as long as you stay in the form, kicking you out of the form when you drop down to 1 life, creating a very unique loop of a gameplay style for this one specific Ascendancy. Backing this up from the extra released information, there's a ton more nodes that we know about in this tree now too. Altered Flesh, which makes cold and lightning damage turn into fire damage taken, and physical damage turn into chaos damage taken. This essentially pushes you towards building less plentiful different resistances, but also makes them far more important as a result. Bedot's Gaze reserves 25% of your life, but grants 1 maximum mana for every 6 maximum life that you have. Bedot's Will reserves 25% life to give 1 maximum spirit per 25 maximum life that you have, which solidifies this honestly as the best possible minion-based Ascendancy with all that extra potential spirit that you can have here. And then Bedot's Hand reserves 25% life to give you bonus energy shield per maximum life that you have too. You can only use one of these 3 at a time, basically the main choice being, do you want to be a minion build, do you want to be a caster focused damage build, or do you just want to be more tanky in general? Seething Body gives you 20% bonus damage as fire damage for you and all allies, including minions of course, but only if your Infernal Flame gauge is in its high status. And then Grinning Immolation makes you put yourself on fire when you deal a critical hit, which is 15% of life and energy shield as fire damage to you per second, but gives you 30% more crit damage bonus just for existing in general. Then the other option for Witch then is the Blood Mage, which leans much further into the more like necromantic side of the base class, focusing, as you guessed it, on blood magic. Sanguimancy makes skills cost base life as well as their normal mana cost too, but monsters will also drop life remnants on death. This is just a nice big heal that you can pick up by walking into them. They also get Crimson Power, which gives you bonus maximum life equivalent to the energy shield amount that you have given by your body armor, and Vitality Siphon lets you leech 10% of spell damage as life, so you gain a ton of regen from this too. To pair with this concept, there are nodes like Gore Spike, which gives you increased critical damage for every 20 life you have. There's also Open Sores, which makes curses originating from you have infinite duration, Blood Barbs, which gives bonus damage as physical to all damage that you deal, and makes elemental damage also contribute to bleeding magnitude. Sunder the Flesh, which is just 15% base spell crit chance, which is awesome, and Grasping Wounds, which prevents 25% of life loss from hits, instead dealing it out to you slowly over the course of 4 seconds, which would benefit a very heavy regen setup, which obviously this subclass is sort of built for. This is far tankier, far less risky than something like the Infernalist, but sort of like these Sorceress options, Infernalist should have a lot more room to sort of master it and apply your own sort of skill to it as well. Past that then we have the Monk base class 2, your typical martial artist class mixed with some elemental melee fun as well. One of the Ascendancies dives much further into that elemental core though, which is the Invoker. Scatter Them to the Winds is a notable that gives you elemental expression and causes this effect to trigger on melee critical hits. This is causing a wave of elemental energy to fire out whenever you crit as a result of this. Faith as a choice gives you the meditate skill, which lets you double your energy shield amount before walking into a fight, and this Ascendancy also offers a choice of what kind of element you really want to focus down on, with I Am the Blizzard giving you 10% of all damage as extra cold damage and creates chilled ground under any enemies that you freeze. I Am the Thunder does the equivalent effect for lightning, giving you 10% of all damage as bonus lightning damage and 25% chance on shocking an enemy to make shocked ground under them and spread that effect around. The big skill at the end of this little node split is And I Shall Rage, giving you the Unbound Avatar skill. When you have this, you gain a stacking buff whenever you apply statuses to enemies, and when you hit the threshold, you transform into this avatar state, increasing your damage and applying even more statuses too, which is really quite awesome, honestly. Aside from this, we had some more nodes revealed last night with the rest of the Ascendancies too. Lead Me Through Grace gives you 1 bonus spirit for every 6 energy shield on body armor or 15 evasion rating on body armor too, but removes any sort of spirit gain from other equipment. And Protect Me From Harm makes evasion give physical damage reduction, but lowers your overall evasion rating a fairly large amount. The Soul Springs Eternal makes meta-tagged skills gain more energy, and Sunder My Enemies makes critical hits ignore non-negative elemental resistances, which is actually a pretty massive deal. The other Ascendancy choice for Monk is actually quite wildly far apart from this too, which is the Acolyte of Charyula. This replaces the Spirit Gauge as a concept instead with Darkness. It gives you 100 Darkness by default and an extra 5 per level that you have. Any damage that you take will take from Darkness before Energy Shield or Life, meaning that it can act as a bit of a defensive tool, but given that Darkness is also fuel for your attacks and damage with this subclass, it's more to give you a punishment if you are hit, as you will lose your Darkness. This is more of a riskier reward playstyle for the class as a result of that, and for example, there's Grasp of the Void, which gives you bonus damage as chaos damage, scaling based off of your unreserved Darkness. Other nodes we've been shown include Chayula's Gift, which increases maximum chaos resistance and doubles chaos resistance in general, and Ravenous Doubts makes Mana Leech instant, while Consuming Questions makes Mana Leech recover energy shields as well. So essentially, you restore shields by attacking enemies, which is part of why you have such high chaos resistance too, to avoid letting you get too massive of a glaring weakness for such a focus on energy shields. Then there's also the Into the Breach skill, which lets you essentially travel into the breach itself, which is of course one of the endgame mechanics worked into the class itself here. This puts you into a unique realm where you can see flames of Charyula on the ground, which can give you life, mana, and bonus damage when you pick them up. The other new nodes then are Reality Rending, which gives random chances to do significant bonus chaos damage with hits, essentially rolling a die on each hit to see if it pops up into Insanity. Lucid Dreaming doubles the duration and effects of the Flames of Charyula, which we just mentioned before, and Inner Silence reduces Darkness Reservation duration 2. Then finally we have the newest class in the game, the Mercenary. This is an extremely unique class within the ARPG genre in general, essentially trying to make it feel more like a shooter game than your typical sort of hack and slash style combat, giving you a ton of different ammo styles as your skills essentially, and letting you intermingle them as however you wish, and creating reloading as its own mechanic essentially within the game. As for the Ascendancies, they have quite some differences between them, but first let's talk about the Witchhunter. This conceptually is essentially a crossbowman who exists to counter magic. The nodes we've been shown here are Obsessive Rituals, which cuts armor and evasion rating in half, but gives you Sorcery Ward. This gives you much more elemental defense at the cost of more weakness to physical damage. Zealous Inquisition gives enemies a chance to explode for damage related to their own maximum life when you kill them, and this chance is doubled against undead and demons too. Then we have a fun one, Judge, Jury, and Executioner, which gives you Decimating Strike. This makes your first hit to an enemy do a substantial amount of bonus damage related to a percentage of their maximum health, up to 30% in that first hit if you hit the high roll effect. Then there's also Witchbane, which adds in a whole new mechanic called Concentration. This is based off of an enemy's maximum life. You break their concentration as you deal damage to them, which then stops them from casting spells after you've done so, essentially just forcing any more dangerous enemies to be significantly weaker when this triggers. This Ascendancy also has Weapon Master, which innately makes 20 passive skill points that you have become weapon set skill points specifically, letting you specialize even further into multiple different weapon sets. Pitiless Killer gives you Culling Strike, which lets you kill any enemy at 30% health or below instantly, still affecting larger enemies just at lower health thresholds. No Mercy gives you bonus damage to enemies depending on how much concentration you've stripped from them, and Ceremonial Ablution increases the effect and recovery of the Sorcery Ward shield. Then finally, the other Ascendancy for the class is called Gemling Legionnaire, and this is both going to be extremely complex and probably extremely powerful in the right hands as well. Rather than focusing on magic and anti-magic, this Ascendancy focuses purely on weapons and ammo, extending your ability to use the gems that give the skills by letting you literally put them in your actual skin itself. As a result, you get nodes like Integrated Efficiency, which lets you have 3 extra skills able to be used at any given time, Thaumaturgical Infusion, Weapon, which gives maximum element resistance increases dependent on the types and amount of support gems that you have activated. And then to sort of make this all even out, there's Adaptive Capability. This makes your highest attribute count for any attribute requirements on any of your gems. So likely Dexterity, meaning that you can use any gem in the game based purely off of your Dexterity stat without having to think about the other ones to actually unlock the requirements. Then there's also Crystalline Potential, which simply increases all skill gem quality by 12%. Aside from this, there's also a node that makes skills cost 30% less to use, but increases attribute requirements on skill gems themselves. There is Gem Studded, which is massive, letting you use 2 copies of the same support gem in different skills. And then there's Enhanced Effectiveness, which doubles the inherent bonuses of any of the main stats. This is honestly going to probably be tough to take proper advantage of for newer players to Path of Exile as a concept, but if you know how to build this Ascendancy, it's likely going to end up quite nuts. That just about does it for today then. All the classes and Ascendancies available at the start of Early Access, the skills and nodes that we know about for them, as well as a general idea of how they will actually play in comparison to each other, with the main goal of course being to assist you all in choosing your first character to play come Early Access launch in just a couple of days, so hopefully this helped. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.